Good evening and welcome to 15 Minutes with Longevity. I'm Giselle Wertheim-Ames and I'm here to help you get your weekly dose of health advice. Tonight we are going to be talking about hypertension and why you should take it more seriously. Joining me in the studio as my expert panel is Dr. Jeff King, a leading and, might I add, outspoken cardiologist from Sunninghill Hospital, and Melissa Kelly, a registered nutritionist and advisor to the Blue Bulls rugby team. Thank you for joining us in the studio this evening. My first question is to you, Dr. King. First of all, what is hypertension? I mean, what's the difference between hypertension and high blood pressure? Are they the same thing or aren't they?
They're really the same thing. I think we're talking about the difference between the medical terminology in terms of hypertension and what the layperson knows as normal blood pressure. So really, it's just an increase in blood pressure that becomes pathological, and levels greater than 130 over 90, 140 over 90 really.
Okay, so that brings me to the point of how you check it. I mean, then obviously what you have to do is actually check your blood pressure regularly. How often should people, when should you be checking your blood pressure? Because obviously it would be at a certain stage of your life. And then how often should you be doing it?
Well, I think the older we get, one should really check it on a regular basis, perhaps over the age of about even 40. It is
What's
an
regular,
aging
by
process.
the way? What is regular? You're a doctor. Once a week? Twice a month?
Well, I think
once a year?
you've got to know, like all other risk factors, you need to know what your levels are at some stage of your life, so that at least you can keep a monitoring system on what your risk is over a period of time. And the more common ones are basically cholesterol, blood pressure, and know what your sugar levels are. And certainly today we've got to know what our waistline measurements are, so that at least we know that we're not at risk in terms of developing blockages of arteries, because this is what eventually will develop in terms of what we term atherosclerosis or arteriosclerosis, meaning to say you develop blockages of the arteries. What
happens to the body? I mean, can you describe it? I mean, what happens to your body physically, and how do you feel whether you've got high blood pressure or not? Or is it just a test that's going to tell you?
It's an enigma that basically doesn't cause any symptoms. So this is what we term as a silent killer. The pathological state that you develop is that your heart is acting as a weightlifter. So as you start thickening muscle when you're doing isometric exercise in the form of weights, the heart is actually acting like a weightlifter, pushing against a higher pressure in the outlet chamber, which is called the aorta, and therefore the muscle is going to thicken, and that's pathological.
Okay, so the heart is really the key to all of this, and that's why we're really at risk of a heart attack if we have high blood pressure.
Correct, because really with a higher blood pressure, your blood flow in the actual vessel becomes shearing. So you actually result in shearing of the actual lining of the arteries that will eventually lead to further blockages, and further final event is going to be clotting. So whatever causes the final clot process will lead to either a stroke or a heart attack, or result in chest pains developing as a result of the narrowing of the artery, limiting flow.
And is it really a combination of factors? So it couldn't just be one thing that would cause you to have, for example, high blood pressure and then have a heart attack. Is it a culmination, like a kind of perfect storm that has to happen in your body, or can other things happen to you that can cause that?
It's usually a multidisciplinary sort of a collective comorbidities, we call them. Okay, so either people are smoking, or they may be drinking too much, or they're eating excessively, leading to weight gain. And weight gain today leads to bigger problems in terms of sleep disturbance. So therefore sleep disturbance with interrupted sleep particularly is one of the chief causes of abnormal blood pressure. And this is all the way of lifestyle. And that's why we always talk about lifestyle change. Yeah. And the lifestyle change is proper in terms of dieting, which we're going to discuss.
Yes, I think I'm going to go to Melissa now. I'm going to come back to you because I want to talk to you about a recent news item. But Melissa, quickly to you. You're a nutritionist. So when we look at how do we guard against high blood pressure from a nutrition point of view?
Well, from a nutrition point of view, as we've seen, that blood pressure or high blood pressure is not isolated on its own, very, very seldom. So it's a part of a cluster of symptoms, and it's called the metabolic syndrome. So if you look at it from that point of view, it's the whole metabolism, the body's metabolism that's disrupted. And that's why I cannot keep the blood pressure in check. But not only the blood pressure, also cholesterol, all the other sugar levels, sleep apnea, those cluster of symptoms that come together. Then you should focus on how can you get this body to help itself. And and your focus point should absolutely start on the waistline. when we're not looking at just treating the hypertension, we're looking at getting the waistline down. So weight loss is the first most important goal, and very easy to measure because you can measure it on the waistline, and you can actually measure a female's measurement should be less than 88 centimeters and a male less than 102 centimeters. So that's your starting point to get your belly fat down.
Can I just ask Dr. Kenya, are these thin people with high blood pressure though?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to be overweight.
Okay.
The figures that were just been quoted are for the Americans. So South Africans, please beware. You need to be smaller.
Okay.
South African men need to be not more than 94 and females not more than 80. Okay, we don't have figures yet for our black population, but they got to be similar. We're not as heavy as the American Negro population. And that's the reason why we've got such high levels. And I think that those levels are too high. They're putting themselves at greater risk.
Okay, well, back to you then. So let's talk about what lifestyle changes you should make then. So you talk about the way, what should we do?
Okay, so first of all, to keep your belly fat low, you should not be eating only one big meal a day. In fact, if you eat only one main meal, you cannot get all the nutrients you need to balance blood pressure in one meal. So your main meal should actually be just a bit bigger than a snack. So you should eat more regular, more often, not overeat at any point, at any meal, to keep your body fat percentage low. And then, as we all know, keep your salt intake low. Salt intake is very much related to high blood pressure. So practical things in your lifestyle, don't use the salt shaker at the table, and rather make use of home-cooked prepared meals where you add herbs and spices, where you prepare home-cook your food. Very limit takeaways, pre-cooked meals, foods from packets and cans. And then very important is that get your balance. If we talk about a balanced diet, we often wonder what exactly is a balanced diet. I think a good starting point is to start with balancing your carbs and your protein intake. Do not cut out your carbs that you don't eat any carbs, because carbohydrate is a very important source of, for example, potassium. You find potassium in your bananas, in your potatoes, your sweet potatoes, peaches, raisins. And it's very important to balance, to not only keep your sodium levels low by cutting out or lowering your salt intake, but also to balance your potassium levels during the day. And that actually combats the negative effects of the sodium. And then fruit and vegetable intake, we've heard it over and over again, the 5 a day, 8 a day. I cannot overemphasize that, because magnesium is a nutrient that you find in the chlorophyll of plants. So the more green foods you eat, the better. You need a lot of magnesium. You need calcium. Calcium has been known absolutely to control blood pressure. So your dairy products are very important.
And exercise, I'm sure.
Oh, most definitely.
Okay.
Without exercise, there's really no gain. Mm-hmm. So in order to achieve adequate weight loss, one's got to effectively use up those calories so that you can actually bring down the weight. Because if you're going to consume a similar amount of food every day, you're going to maintain that weight. You need to bring the food quantity down, and emphasis on quantity and quality, as we've heard. And the most important thing is to actually make sure that you don't add too much carbohydrate, because the fruits, be very careful, considered to be healthier diet, but remember, 1 fructose molecule is equivalent to 2 glucose molecules, so you're getting a double dose. So if you really have got a weight problem already, which affects 61% of our population already, therefore you need to actually be taking much less.
So sugar is a big issue as well in this
Any
whole
form of carbohydrate.
Speak about salt, but sugars. Okay, I'm intrigued. I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but we just keep hearing these stories of young people having heart problems and people dying. Just just recently, Voyo Mbuli, very popular television star, collapsed at a match and died a few hours later. First, it was thought it was a heart attack. Now we understand it was a pulmonary embolism. When we have chest pains, I mean, how do we know what is the difference between a heart attack, an anxiety attack, a pulmonary embolism, and again, what should one do in those situations?
One's got to be careful about the type of symptoms. Okay, anxiety, stress is one of the bigger problems that we have today. Those type of pains are usually different type of pains. Anything very localized, where it's just pinpointed to a particular area, is seldom, if ever, a cardiac problem. Okay, the type of pain that you're going to get from a typical angina or a heart attack is usually over a wide area. and that's the difference. Whereas pulmonary embolism is usually sharp pain and associated with breathing difficulty, and then a person is going to develop it because there's a blockage of flow.
And I heard John Robbie say that he had like days of having a heart pains in his heart and he did nothing. So does it creep up on you, or does it, can it be a combination again?
One's got to adhere the warning symptoms. Okay. So if this is a regular phenomenon rather than just an isolated event, then obviously one must pay greater attention to that.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. I think we all have to look after ourselves and probably carry around a little waistband. What are those measurements? It probably would be a good idea.
Absolutely.
Just check our measurements, not just our blood pressure.
Check the measurement for every kilogram, and 1 centimeter above that is 1 kilogram in weight.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming to the studio.
My pleasure.
You.
Earlier on, we spoke to Dr. Vash Munga Singh, CEO of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, about the Heart and Stroke Foundation's role in heart health in South Africa, as well as why we as South Africans need to pay more attention to our heart health.
It is what we call the silent disease, for the reason that many people are unaware that they have hypertension or high blood pressure because they feel no symptoms, they have no symptoms, until it develops complications. So here we're talking about developing heart disease or having a stroke, or renal, which is kidney disease, or going blind because it can affect the eyes as well, or the arteries in the eyes. So it's only once one develops complications over a period of time, when the hypertension or the blood pressure is not controlled, that it becomes overt.
Who suffers from hypertension in South Africa?
What concerns us is that hypertension affects all South Africans. So we're talking about there's no particular racial or demographic disparities or differences. In fact, what we do know is that urban black South Africans, or those who are urbanized and have moved into the urban areas, have a slightly higher incidence than the rural black South Africans. However, if you look at the incidence in its entirety, across racial groups, does not discriminate. It affects all. And in fact, the number that I gave you of more than 6 million South Africans being hypertensive, this is from the age of 15 above. So we're talking about from quite a young age as well. Of course, the incidence rises within that group. The incidence rises as one grows older, as one ages, because you are at greater risk of developing hypertension with age. But it affects all South Africans.
What are the treatment options available to those that have been diagnosed?
So one needs to consider lifestyle changes, as well as including drug treatment if it's necessary, but that is what a clinician will decide on. However, the cornerstone, and whether or not you're on drug treatment or not, there must be healthy lifestyle changes as well. So adopting a healthy lifestyle, what does that mean? You can actually control, and research has shown that you can lower blood pressure to a certain extent by exercising regularly. So even if that is 20 minutes of physical activity, and we're not talking about in the gym all the time, but just walking, physical activity, 20 minutes a day is sufficient. In fact, what we advocate is a total of 150 minutes in a whole week, and that's not a lot. That's 30 minutes for 5 days, Monday to Friday. What you eat is very important. Lots of fruit and vegetables, but at the same time, salt, the amount of salt one eats is also very important. Now we know, and science has shown, that a high salt intake is associated, very strongly associated, with raising your blood pressure levels. So controlling your salt levels is very important. And then, of course, all the other aspects of a healthy diet.
Well, that's it for this evening's program. I hope you'll join me next week when we look at health issues that affect men and what men should be doing to keep themselves healthy. Now that should really be interesting. Hope you have a happy and healthy week ahead. Cheers.